Welcome to the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society. Welcome to ITSP Magazine Podcast Radio. You're about to listen to an episode of Tech Done Different podcast with Ted Harrington. Do you follow the pack or challenge the status quo? Join Ted as he explores how to succeed by going against conventional wisdom. You'll hear leaders in technology and security tell stories about how they achieve their success by doing things differently. Knowledge is power, now more than ever.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Tech Done Different. I'm your host, Ted Harrington, and with me here today is my special guest, Keri Pearlson. Keri is the executive director for the research group at MIT. Keri, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ted. I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah, we're excited to have you. I've been looking forward to this conversation since you and I talked about it several weeks or maybe even a couple months ago. And, you and I, well, you know this, obviously, our audience doesn't know this, but you and I first got connected last year or maybe a year and a half ago when I came to talk about some of the research that we had done to your group. And instantly, I knew I walked in that room, Keri, and I was like, these are my people. So for the benefit of our listeners, can you tell everyone a little bit about what the research group is that you're involved with at MIT? And then we can talk a little bit about some of the research that you're working on right now.
Perfect. Well, thank you for that opportunity. I love to talk about our research group. We're called CAMS, C-A-M-S, Cybersecurity at MIT Sloan. Not to be confused with the IT group that does cybersecurity. We are a research consortium, a group of researchers, faculty, and students, and full-time researchers that look at the managerial, organizational, and governance kinds of issues around cyber. So if you think about managing cybersecurity in organizations, there's a technical aspect. You want to make sure that you have the right technology, and that's very important. And very important research is being done at MIT and other places about that. But our group takes a little different tact. We look at the organizational side. We're really interested in projects that have questions like, how do you know how secure you are? That's a business question. How much risk do you take on? How do you think about cyber insurance? How do you build a culture of cybersecurity? How do you get everybody marching to the same beat so that they keep the organization secure? How do you think about compliance? You can be compliant and not cyber secure. You can be cyber secure and not compliant. So these are questions that have, there might be a technology answer, but more likely it's a leadership management question. And we spend all of our time looking at those kinds of questions.
Oh man, that's music to my ears. I advocate very strongly that security is in fact a leadership challenge as much or perhaps more so than it is a technical challenge. It sounds like that's really where you guys are focusing.
Exactly.
So the research you're doing right now, as I understand it, you're looking at cultural issues, how to build a culture around cybersecurity. Is that correct?
So that is the project, or one of the projects I lead. We've been looking for a couple years at how do organizations get everybody aligned and marching in the same direction so that they can keep their companies more resilient. So what we've come up with, and I'm happy to dive as deep as you'd like, is what we call our cybersecurity culture model. And the basic idea of this research is that most people think you put people through a training class and they're going to now act more secure. And we all know that a training class is just not enough. It's really important. I wouldn't say don't do training, but it's not sufficient. And the reason it's not sufficient is training classes don't necessarily change people's attitudes, values, and beliefs. What we want to do is align everybody's beliefs around the idea that it's their job, because they're a member of our group or our company or our organization, it's their job to also think about keeping the place secure. And so we've done a lot of research in this area. I have a lot of stories. We can go into any of these different areas that you like, but we've come up with a model of managerial mechanisms, things managers can do tomorrow to make their companies more secure, and how we drive values, attitudes, and beliefs.
I love the way you've organized those ideas, and it's such a powerful sentiment or a powerful idea to think about that it's belief systems really is what we're dealing with here. And yeah, as you as you started talking about training, myself and I'm sure others who are listening were like, oh man, training is just can be so tedious. And it's because it's like, oh, I got to go through the motions. But what you're talking about is almost like rewiring the way people think about themselves and their role and how they fit into the organization. So I guess two questions from that. One, am I reading you correctly? And two, how do we do that? How do we actually rewire beliefs?
Yeah, so that is the question. You're right on target here. We're asking people to take on maybe a different value system just because they're part of our organization. The way we look at it is we want to drive certain behaviors. We want people to not click on phishing emails. We want people, if they see something, say something, report it. We want people to not pick up the thumb drive that they found in the parking lot and stick it in their computer to see what's on it, or more likely to click on a link that is potentially one that opens up a backdoor to malware. We don't want people to share the system admin password just because it's more convenient with a supplier who's plugging into our systems. There's a whole list of behaviors we want people to do or not do that will help keep our company more secure. We often learn about those in training. I know when I started at MIT, I've only been at MIT a few years. I've been in the IT business for 30 something years, but I've only been at cyber at MIT for just a few years. And when I started, I had to take a training class. And I want to take it because I'm interested in cyber, but also because I'm now a new member of this community. And in that class, they taught us really important things. How do you make sure your password is secure? How often I should change my password? What I should do if I see something that's wrong? All that training was great. I had that training class 4 years ago. How much am I remembering today? Probably not very much. And I might remember more than the average bear because I'm the executive director of our cyber group. But think about somebody in marketing or somebody in an administrative role that has nothing to do with cyber. How much are they remembering? Or think about my colleague who started at MIT in the 1970s. When do you think he had that class? He probably didn't have a class in cyber. And if he did, he certainly isn't going to remember. And even what they taught him back then is going to be different. So training is super important. It kind of sets the guidelines. It gives me a reference of where to go, but it's just not enough. We really want to start thinking about how do we change people's behaviors? And I personally believe behaviors are changed because you value something or you believe it's important. So if I could convince you that changing your password once a quarter was really important, you're more likely to do it than if I just put you through a training class to do it. And it's more than awareness. I mean, a lot of companies go with awareness programs, and those are also super important. But it's not enough just to tell you it's important. I have to somehow get your mind, get your value system, change your attitudes. And that's really what our research is all about. How do we drive those values, attitudes, and beliefs about cybersecurity?
That's such a fascinating distinction that you're drawing. It's not about do this or don't do that, although ultimately that's the end result that we're looking for, but it's this is important to you. And it seems like that's the magic elixir. If we can get people to think that it's important to them, then the behaviors we're looking for will actually, those behaviors will change. Are there examples or any stories that you can share where that's happened successfully or maybe failed that we could learn from?
Sure. So yes, I want to change the way you think about or the way your listeners are thinking about cybersecurity behaviors. So I'll give you a few stories and then we can dive deeper into other areas, other stories. I've got dozens of stories. And in fact, just as an aside, if any of your listeners want more information, our website has all sorts of papers on this. It's cams.mit.edu. And all of that stuff's publicly available. So they're welcome to go look up more stuff if they're interested. But let me give you one story. So one company that we studied, it's a bank in Brazil. And they have what they call a cyber evangelist. His job is to build this culture. Now, in full disclosure, he's someone that worked with us and he knew our model. So he was putting in activities and then based on some of the things that we had talked about with him. So I can't say that he's an example of our model and we found him. He learned from our model and implemented these things. But for example, there are some behaviors he wanted to drive in the organization. And he realized that he needed to have some sort of reward system. If there's a reward system, people are more likely to value doing that behavior and they're more likely to do it. So he had an activity he wanted people to do and he offered them a cookie. And he said he ran out of cookies so fast, he had to go get more cookies. I mean, it wasn't a big reward, but a reward was enough to drive people's attitudes towards, this is something I'd like to spend time on. It became a competition. It became something fun. People got a cookie out of the process. And he was just totally surprised at how that little reward made a difference in driving attitudes and values and beliefs. So performance reward systems is one way that we can drive values, attitudes, and beliefs. I'll give you another story. Yeah. Another company, if you show some sort of good behaviors, you can win a badge that you can put in your email. So now all of a sudden you're seen as somebody who's a cyber defender in that organization. And people crave that badge. They do whatever it takes to get that badge, to be able to put that badge in their email to show that they are one of the cyber secure people in the company. And the reason that particular company, it's an insurance firm, an international insurance firm, they have all sorts of components to their cultural managerial mechanisms, things that they do. Lots of stories about them that make people want to be part of their environment. I'll share those with you also. But the idea here is rewarding people for behaviors is important. Another thing is simply telling them, not through training's important, but through other mechanisms. Like if an executive makes cybersecurity important to them, makes it one of their priorities, it's likely that their team members will also inherit that feeling that this is something important. So back to this insurance company, the C-level executives talked about cybersecurity, not just the IT people, but all executives. And that alone sent the message that these guys think it's important, and that percolates throughout the organization. Other people think it's important if their boss thinks it's important. So simply bringing up cybersecurity in anything as simple as starting your meetings with a 5-minute cybersecurity message note, use something in the press that's caught people's attention, and take a few minutes to talk about how we can make sure that doesn't happen here, or make sure it does, whatever the issue is, but bring the current press into your meetings. People are talking about it anyway. Make it something obvious that the leaders are talking about, and that will start to drive beliefs that this is important to our organization. So let me stop there so you can ask me more questions, but I've got dozens of stories like that.
Yeah, that's really cool to hear those stories, and what I'm hearing out of those stories when we talk about reward systems anyway, is that it sounds to me like the reward itself doesn't even matter. I mean, the chocolate chip cookie, or I don't think you said it was chocolate. The cookie is—
That's what I would have too. I'd go for the chocolate chip.
I totally inserted that. I was like, well, I want a chocolate chip cookie. So this story is now a chocolate chip cookie story. But the monetary value of a cookie is essentially zero to the recipient. They can't resell it or anything. They can't invest it. They can only eat it. Yet they're excited about it. And the badge, there's no monetary value. And so it sounds like what you're saying, the takeaway here is that it is a reward system, not that you need to give everybody, a $250 gift card or the next AirPods or whatever. People will do it for the sake of winning a reward, whatever it is.
Yes.
Is that true?
That's true. It's sort of the gamification idea. You don't really get anything for playing a game, but you get the intrinsic feeling of success. And I should add that punishments work the same way. If people know there's consequences to their actions, that sends a message of values, attitudes, and beliefs. And in another company that I was actually just talking to earlier this week, I was presenting this model, and one of the participants in the program said, yeah, we do that in our organization. If you click on a phishing email, the first time you have to take a 15-minute reminder class that you don't click on these. We do phishing exercises all the time. So we do one, you click on it, you got to take a class. You click on it the second time, you got to meet with HR. You click on it the third time, your manager gets involved with HR. You click on it a fourth time, your internet privileges are gone. And the fifth time, you're fired. So we don't have very many people clicking on phishing emails. So here's an organization that it's an industrial control type environment. So in their world, clicking on a phishing email could mean life or death. It could spark a physical reaction, not just credit cards or data being stolen. Somebody could die if the wrong equipment turns on or off at the wrong time. So in their world, safety and cyber safety are intertwined. And therefore, clicking on a phishing email could have dire consequences physically. And so they can't take a chance. So in their world, the negative consequences play a big role, and they have very few people that click on phishing emails.
Now, in your research, have you assessed, or could you just make a gut reaction to this, even if you haven't, which is more powerful, a reward system or a punishment system?
Yeah, I don't really have a sense officially about that. Personally, I think they both are equally important. It depends on the severity of the punishment or the value of the reward. I think there are a lot of people that would do something for a cookie or for a badge, or just even for a good for you. Thank you for doing this. Here's your name on a list somewhere. And there are a lot of people that wouldn't bother. So I personally, I would do something I was rewarded for, and I would not do something I was punished for, but that's just me. I think I don't really have a sense of which is more powerful, but I think it's important when you're thinking about your cyber culture to realize that all of these things send messages about what's important in your organization. And that's really what you want to focus on. What message do you want to send? What values, attitudes, and beliefs do you want to drive? I can give you another example. So if we want people to report phishing emails when they see one, we want them to report it to our IT group or whomever. How do they know how to do that? You can teach them in a training class, but how that's one detail. How much are they going to remember from that? So we want to make that something that they think about. If we want them to report it, we want to make it so that they feel they can report it, that they know how to report it, and that it's low risk, low cost for them. Self-efficacy is what we call this. And so we want to build very easy ways for people to report phishing emails. And then we want to tell them. That's where the awareness campaign comes in. The awareness campaign isn't don't click on the phishing email. There is that. But if you see something, report it here. That's the message we want to send. And that sends the message that, number one, it's important. Number two, here's the action you can take. And if I can take an action, I'm likely to do something about taking that action. If I don't know how to take the action, I'm probably not going to do anything about it.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I certainly don't know the answer to which is more or less powerful either. But one thing that does seem to stand out about the different scenarios you just presented is that it sounds like any reward will motivate an action, but a inconsequential punishment might not. So if the punishment for clicking the phishing email was you get an automated email that says you shouldn't have done that, and you're the only person to see it, like, still might do it, right? So I don't know. That doesn't count as research by any means, but that does seem to be an interesting distinction between the two. But I've always actually thought that, from what I've understood and studied, that negative reinforcement is far more powerful than positive reinforcement. But that would be interesting to understand better.
Well, I think the reinforcement picture is what you said makes sense. And I remember that research myself, but we're talking about motivating an action. So we're not talking about necessarily reinforcing behaviors. We're talking about motivating new behaviors, perhaps. Mm-hmm. So well, let me move on to some of the other ideas. Another one is evaluating people on their performance. If you don't want people to do bad behaviors and you let them get away with it, they're going to get away with it. It's kind of akin to if there's no consequences. But if you're evaluating them and somehow making notes in their evaluation, in your evaluation process, they're more likely to know that this is important to the organization and do something about it. So, for example, one organization we have regularly brings up opportunities for people to help the whole organization as a whole become more cyber secure. You could lead a seminar on something you learned in cybersecurity, or you can bring an idea to your group and have a discussion or lead a discussion around in your group. And those are things that become part of your performance evaluation, and show how important it is in your mind to be part of the group. And that's something this company that did this wants to encourage. And so they build it into their performance evaluation system, and that encourages people to value it.
Yeah, certainly aligning to what the company wants. That's the big thing that'll drive behavior change. So one of the commonalities to everything you're talking about here is that in order to do this successfully, you need to change behaviors, change the way people think, their values, et cetera. So that begets the question, how does a company best determine what it is trying to prioritize, and how does it determine that in context of the other priorities that might even be in conflict with a secure culture?
Yeah, so this is the big question here. I mean, we have lots of things we want our people to do. We want them to be safe. We want them to be secure. We want them to be ethical. We want them to be good team members. We want them to do the work we hired them to do. I mean, there's lots of competing behaviors we want people in our organizations to do. My research really looks at sort of the incremental importance of cyber secure behaviors, because I really believe that today we can't afford to just rely on technology to keep us safe. Many people think that the technologies in the organization will keep you safe, and they do a really good job. And we all know that companies have hundreds, if not thousands, of knocks on the door, if you will. The bad guys are always finding new ways to get into our organizations, and we like to say they're getting badder faster. They're getting better at finding those open windows and open doors than we can even close down. And the SolarWinds story is just the most latest one that we've seen. There are all sorts of ways that the bad guys find to get in. And so we can't, the technologies can only keep us so safe. Every time the bad guys come up with something new, our people are our first line of defense, really. Our people are the ones that are going to notice an anomaly, maybe even faster than a technology would notice an anomaly. And it's our people that really need to be on the front lines. And so I don't quite know how to tell a manager why they should make cybersecurity more important than other priorities. Because quite frankly, if your business isn't going to make money and be in business, it doesn't matter how secure you are. But on the other hand, if you're not focused on making sure that you drive these kind of values, attitudes, and beliefs, then you're not going to have a company to run either, because there are so many ways and so many opportunities for the nefarious actors to steal away our assets. And we just can't afford to have that happen. I mean, anybody who thinks they're safe because they're a small company or they're an inconsequential company is just not right. They're not paying attention. They're just as vulnerable as the big companies. They just have less windows and doors for the guys to get in. I think every company has to be thinking about, how do we secure our crown jewels? How do we secure our assets? And we have to make sure we have business continuity plans for if, God forbid, something happens to us.
Yeah, you're spot on for sure. The smaller companies are oftentimes even the stepping stone that's used to attack other organizations.
Yeah. And
when you're talking about these ideas, I wrote down because I thought it was so good. They're getting badder faster. That is definitely going to be in the show notes because it's such a good quote. You
got to credit my colleague Stuart Madnick for that one. He says that all the time. Professor Madnick says that all the time.
All right, Professor.
The bad guys are getting badder faster.
I love it. He'll get the love for sure. What you're talking about there is really fundamentally innovation, and that we're up against adversaries who are innovating and relentlessly so. I draw this parallel in my book about how what we're up against are like squirrels, because you live in near MIT, and so you've seen squirrels, and like almost nothing you can do will stop them from getting to the bird feeder, because they're relentless and they innovate. And that's really what attackers are like. They're just constantly coming up with new ways to attack the things. So how should a company that is already resource constrained, already has too many priorities, doesn't have enough money, doesn't have enough time, is lacking in resources, how do they deal with such a relentless pace of innovation?
Yeah, so there's two things. One is the relentless pace of innovation in my mind. And I actually watched a video recently about squirrels. I can't remember what the video was, but it's something on YouTube about these guys that were trying to stop the squirrels from getting to the feeder and putting this whole set of obstacles in their way. And they learned. So you're exactly right. They learned. They're incredible. The dark web, the nefarious actors are just like that, whether they're state actors or just, money hungry or want to find our assets. I think two things. I think of it more like going to the gym. We all want to be healthy and we all want to put off going to the gym and we all want to eat healthy, but we never have time. I don't know about you, but I just can't seem to find the hour and a half to go to the gym or to work out, even in this pandemic world, the 45 minutes to go work out on my equipment. But I know that if I don't make it a priority, at some point, it's going to come back to me. And I think cybersecurity is, in my mind, the same way. There's always a reason not to spend time and energy and resource on it. But at some point, you just have to make the decision to do it. So I don't think small and medium, I'd like to write a book called Cybersecurity Can Be Free. Maybe we should co-author that together. I think there are dozens of examples of things you can do that will build cybersecurity into your organization that don't cost a lot of money or don't take a lot of resource. For example, as I mentioned, the 5 minutes in front of a meeting, this bank in Brazil, their executives have an all hands meeting. And at the beginning of every all hands meeting, they take 5 minutes and talk about something about cybersecurity. That doesn't cost anything. You mentioned the cookie and the badging. Those don't really cost anything. And yet they're so powerful. They drive values, attitudes, and beliefs. So I think the answer to your question is not how do you prioritize cybersecurity in the midst of all these other priorities, but what are you going to do if you don't prioritize cybersecurity? And I'm not trying to scare people at all. It's not about scaring them. You can get away with not really investing in security for a long time. And you might be lucky enough to never really have a big issue because the technology, the good guys are innovating also. And there are lots of promise in AI and ML and trying to detect anomalies and threats and vulnerabilities. There are all sorts of innovations in tools outside of AI and ML to shore up our defenses, our defense in depth strategy, putting more layers of defense in our defense in depth strategy. And those eventually will be available and cost money and trickle down to smaller businesses. But I don't think we can just sit back and wait until somebody else solves the problem for us. I think we have to jump in. And the easiest way to jump in is to start with very small ideas that start getting our people thinking about how important cyber is, changing their values, attitudes, and beliefs. So if I was talking to somebody who told me they just don't know where they're going to find the resource, I would say in your next management meeting, bring up the topic. We want to make sure people know what to do. What can we do? And see what people's ideas are. And just the mere fact that you put it in your management meeting will show you think it's a priority. And that will start to drive the values, attitudes, and beliefs in your organization that this is important.
I love the security is fitness metaphor. I use that one myself a lot. And in addition to the things that you described that are parallels, there's also this perception or the angle to think about that is the sort of attitude that goes with it, which is that it never ends. Like you're never going to ever be fit. And it's like, I never have to work out anymore because it immediately backsides. It's something that once you do it right, you look good and you feel good and you join a community of enthusiasts, but it's hard and not everybody's going to do it. Not everybody's going to prioritize it. And I'm of the thinking that those who do security right have the same mindset as those who get fitness right. Not to say you need to be like, world champion weightlifter, but just exercise and, make your heart healthy. They all share the same common trait, which is they constantly seek improvement and want to get better every day. Does your research touch on that idea at all about an organization's value of constantly trying to improve itself or its industry?
Yeah. So again, we focus on cybersecurity, but yes, this idea of constantly adding to in this research, it's about culture, but adding to the strength of your cybersecurity culture. Most of the organizations that we look at are doing exactly what you described, although I don't think anyone's ever described it quite that way. This constant improving and constant fitness analogy. One company we looked at, they have several companies have a cybersecurity leader who's in charge of building a culture. So this isn't the CISO. The CISO is in charge of everything. So the CISO can't be your day-to-day culture czar, if you will, or culture evangelist. You have to have somebody else that does it. And when you have somebody that owns building a culture, then you've got a resource this one, of course, costs money. So small companies may not make it a person's whole job. But in the two companies I'm thinking about, it is somebody's entire job. It's more than awareness. It's about building culture. And when you take off the shackles of just building awareness and start to think about how do we change hearts and minds, values, attitudes, and beliefs, what you open up is this whole marketing background, this whole, marketing people, that's what they do. They change hearts and minds. They change values, attitudes, and beliefs. They want to convince you that some behavior that they want you to do, buy their product, do their service, take their actions, is valuable to you. So one company actually hired a marketing person into the role of cybersecurity culture leader. She reports to the CISO, and her job is campaigns and building culture. And of course, she's a marketing person, so she's got all sorts of tools in her toolbox that she's brought out to help change hearts and minds. And it could be as simple as changing the words. Everybody wants to be secure, but does anybody really know what that means? Everybody wants to be cyber secure. Nobody would say that's a bad idea. Nobody would say that they're not going to be secure. But when it comes down to the next level of what do, they may not know. In that particular organization, they don't call it cybersecurity, they call it data protection, because everybody in that organization understands data and it has to be protected. And all of a sudden, that just change in language completely changes the activities that people are the values and the attitudes of people towards cybersecurity. And when they see something that makes data insecure or at risk, they know they got to step up and do something about it. So a marketing person is able to put in those kinds of campaigns, activities, processes that make it work. But if somebody doesn't own this, then it tends to not happen quite as in depth, quite as well, simply because it's one of many things that somebody would be doing, and putting your time and attention towards building a culture of cybersecurity just doesn't seem to happen. It's like the back to the fitness analogy. There's always something else to do besides go to the gym. There's always something else to invest in cyber besides thinking up the next cool campaign that's going to change somebody's attitude.
So how does an organization measure whether they've succeeded?
Aha, that is the big question. How do you measure if you succeeded? And that is the question that most companies are still struggling with. So there's some obvious number metrics, if you will. How many people fail a phishing email exercise and seeing a decrease in that number. Or looking at other kinds of testing, penetration testing from a human resource side, from a people side, to see if people fall victim to things. Not necessarily phishing, but those same kinds of things. You can imagine other exercises that you could run to see if people fall for them. There are some tools people have put in place, like how many people have participated in campaigns, or how many awards have you given out, things like that. So there are some clever ways to put metrics in place. But really, all of those in my mind are kind of peripheral. Just because people don't fail a phishing exercise doesn't mean your company's secure. And how do you know how secure your company is really the $1 million question, if you will. So that gets into a whole set of other kinds of metrics. But I think it's really difficult to measure the success of a culture other than to say you don't have breaches and you don't know that that's really a cause and effect. So we're still trying to figure out what are good ways to measure this. We don't have any good ways to measure it yet.
That is, I agree. I was asking you because I don't have the answer either. I was curious to hear what the research community thinks. So,
Well, I actually sat in on a presentation today by a guy who has been researching this, and his way to measure it is structured tests, structured research paradigm. So he does, treatment and control groups, and he tries to see if the treatment group does better than the control group. I'm not so sure that's as practical in the day-to-day real world of an organization. But certainly if you want to measure if something's effective, putting something in place where you treat some part of the group and you don't treat other parts of the group and you see how they do, there's a logical way to measure the success of a program. I know when we're talking analytics, for example, and launching marketing campaigns, that's how you evaluate the success of a marketing campaign. You give it to some people, you don't give it to others, and you see how the performance is. So you could do that. I don't have any off the tip of my fingers examples of that, but that's what this other researcher was sharing with us actually just earlier today.
Love it. So as we wrap up here, and I feel like I could talk to you for literally the entire day, but I know you have things to do. As we wrap up, let's pull out your crystal ball. What's coming next? What's around the corner? What should organizations be thinking about in terms of, innovation, or what's next for security?
So I think there's three areas that we're starting to research at MIT, at CAMS, that are promising for helping all organizations become more resilient. So one of those we've already talked about, that was sort of the use of AI and ML. There's a lot of research being done both to try to figure out how those tools can help us detect and perhaps prevent cyber incidences, but there's lots of tools out there today that do that, and more coming. So I think that has a lot of promise. Staying on top of that is an area that we have identified for us. The other is supply chain. I think the SolarWinds example really highlights that it's one thing to send out a questionnaire to your suppliers and make sure that they are doing the secure things you need done for compliance. But it's quite another to know that your entire supply chain and third and fourth and fifth and further back suppliers are also secure. And we don't quite know yet how to do that. But the whole SolarWinds example really, in some levels, we think it might be a game changer, because we now have to we really have an example to point to. We have the test case that shows how detrimental it can be if we don't solve this problem. So there are lots of resources going to look at supply chain. We're actually looking at it from a culture perspective. Is there a way to perpetuate a cybersecurity culture back through a supply chain? What does that look like? How do you build products that are secure? We design products for manufacturability and for usability and for all sorts of other criteria. Why aren't we also designing them with cybersecurity in mind? Why isn't that a design criteria? Why is it always an add-on to the feature list, as opposed to just a natural way we think about products and services? So I think there's some promise in looking at product design and supply chains. And then the last one is cloud. I think a lot of companies today are relying more and more on the cloud. I wouldn't say their particular cloud provider, because most companies use multiple cloud providers. Mm-hmm. And I think we need to solve the problem of where's the demarcation point? Just because everything you have is in the cloud doesn't mean your cloud provider is keeping it secure to the way you need it secure. They're securing the platform for sure. And hopefully they're securing the access to the platform. But you're still responsible for your data that's up on the cloud. If you let in a nefarious actor into your system, even if it's on the cloud, you got to deal with that. So just because something's in the cloud doesn't mean that you don't have to think about security. You just have to manage it a little differently. And I think those are issues that people are still grappling with. So cloud, supply chain, and AI ML.
I love it. Keri, you're so awesome. Thank you for being on the show, sharing all these insights. I personally learned a lot from you here today. So thank you so much for spending some time with us.
Thank you for having me. And again, if anybody wants to learn more, go to our website, reach out to me. We'd love to share our research. It's publicly available, and we thrive on the fact that people find the research that we're doing useful.
That's great. I'm glad you're putting it out in the world, and I'm glad to have you in my sphere of people that I get the privilege to know. So thank you for being on the show, and
thank you
everybody for listening. If you want to learn more about the show or apply to be on the show yourself and try to match being as good of a guest as Keri, go to tedharrington.com/podcast, and we'll see you next time.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Tech Done Different podcast with Ted Harrington. If you learned something new and this conversation made you think, then share itspmagazine.com with your friends, family, and colleagues. If you represent a company and wish to associate your brand with our conversations, sponsor one or more of our podcast channels. We hope you will come back for more stories and follow us on our journey. You can always find us at the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society.